Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Friday Ramblings. I am your host, the Bardic one, and we are here to discuss some classic comic book fun and basically introduce a team that will no doubt inspire future rambling videos because it's a very interesting team with a really rich, deep history. In fact, over time, this comic book team has become, by its very definition, themed around superhero legacies and the deep history contained within the DC universe. I am, of course, referring to the Justice Society, sometimes known as Justice Society of America, but the good old JSA. Now, you may be aware of this from some of our earlier videos. We had mentioned Infinity Inc., which was composed of the children of some of the earliest Justice Society members. But that was just a small little splinter look into the society itself. As I said, this video is going to be more of a quick rundown of the team's history in and of itself and how many different comic book volumes and stuff they've appeared in, so that later on we can go into more detailed ramblings about specific characters or specific eras. This is your, Justice Society 101 intro class. And trust me, folks, it'll be worth it. Because, if I'm going to be honest, when it comes to DC hero teams, I adore the Titans, but there's just something about the Justice Society that is just, it is right there for me. Like, I will say this. I prefer the Justice Society to the Justice League. I feel like a lot of times the Justice League is more focused on producing comic books that, it's all about, let's put together a team that'll really intrigue people and lead to sales for this particular short period of time, and not let's build upon our legacy and our history and really continue to tell an ongoing story of a team that has existed for, even within the comic book continuity, decades, because there is a need for the perspective on superheroing that this team only provides. That's the Justice Society to me, is, these are the guys. They may not always be the A-listers, may not always be the ones saving the world, but they are the ones leading the way. So how did this all start? Well, it all starts in the Golden Age of comic books. For reference, the Golden Age refers to comics produced between 1938 and 1956. Golden Age comic books did give us many of DC's superheroes and definitely superhero concepts, even if their later legacy characters from the Silver Age would in some ways eclipse them. I'm looking at you, Green Lantern and Flash. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and League versus Society, Golden versus Silver, well, that's a debate for another time. Still, the Justice Society of America first appeared in All-Star Comics number 3, which came out in the winter of 1940, written by Gardner Fox and edited by Sheldon Mayer. The team's initial roster included Dr. Fate, Hourman, the Spectre, the Sandman, the Atom, Flash, Green Lantern, and Hawkman. Now, the JSA's ventures were originally written by Gardner Fox, but would also be written by John Broome and Robert Conagher. And the series was illustrated by a wide variety of artists, including Martin Nodell, Joe Kubert, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon, Alex Toth, Sheldon Moldoff, Carmine Infantino, and many more. Now, the first JSA story features the team's first meeting with a framing sequence for each member, telling a story of an individual exploit. And in the next issue, the team worked together on a common case, but each story from their end still featured the members individually on a mission involving part of the case, and then banding together in the end to wrap things up. An in-house rule explicitly laid out on the last page of All-Star Comics number 5 required that whenever a member received his or her own title, that character would leave All-Star Comics, becoming an honorary member of the JSA. Thus, the Flash was originally replaced by Johnny Thunder after number 6, and Green Lantern shortly thereafter for the same reason. For this reason, Superman and Batman were established as already being honorary members prior to All-Star Comics number 3. How these two heroes helped found the JSA before becoming honorary members was not explained until DC Special number 29 in 1977. Hawkeye is the only member to appear in every JSA adventure in the original run of All-Star Comics, which means, yes, he is the definitive Justice Society member. Because #spoilers, Hawkman would continue to appear in later versions of the team, except for that brief time period where nobody was allowed to write Hawkman stories because DC royally screwed up Hawkman. That's definitely a discussion for another time. So, right then and there, we already have an interesting concept that, frankly, you would never see play out in comic books today. The idea that the book was used to promote heroes who at the time were not appearing regularly in their own solo titles, and that should any of them get a solo book, that they would be removed from the team as far as who you would see in the book, and their status referred to as honorary members, what in some different team aspects in comics you might call like a reserve member. This, as I said, you never see in comic books today because they love cross-marketing. You know, how many different books does Wolverine appear in any given month? You know? How many times do people love having, you know, short-term teams, and it's like, oh, let's throw Deadpool in there, even though he's got like 2 solo books at the time. Okay, I'm just picking on Marvel there. Let's go back to DC to really toss around your changing cultural perspectives. You know, how many times does Batman show up in any given month? I mean, the dude has like, one point in time, the guy had like 4 solo books. And was occasionally appearing as a reserve member of the Justice League. Back in the golden age, people would have thought that was insane. They would have thought it was flooding the market. Now, yeah, he's an A-lister. We expect it. But, again, that's showing the difference of the time and the culture and the comic book business more than anything. But it is interesting to note for the sake of the Justice Society team, as this was a great way to bring members in without expanding the team too greatly. All-Star Comics number 8 featured the first appearance of Wonder Woman. Unlike the other characters who had their own titles, she was allowed to appear in the series, but only as the JSA's secretary from number 11 onward, and did not actively take part in most adventures until much later in the series. So, good trivia fact for you. So, we're going to kind of wrap up the Golden Age part real quick because we got a lot more to discuss, a lot more decades. After all, we're still in the 40s. The 1940s. So All-Star Comics and the JSA's Golden Age adventures ended with issue number 57, the title then becoming All-Star Western, which did not feature any superheroes. It should be noted the good amount of artwork did survive from an unpublished All-Star Comics story titled The Will of William Wilson, and has been reprinted in various publications. The explanation for the team's disappearance and the inactivity of most of its roster after the early 1950s, which, as you recall, we said was the ending of the golden age of comic books, when superheroes kind of became passé and untrendy for a while, was first given in Adventure Comics number 466 in December of 1979 by writer Paul Levitz, which explained that most of the society... Let me try that again. Most of the society chose to disband and retire rather than appear in front of the Joint Un-American Activities Committee, which demanded they unmask themselves. For those of you who are not really familiar with this time period, this story basically served as a reference to the post-World War II communist paranoia Red Scare era, in which basically, in real life, a lot of famous people had their careers ruined, or even just if they were lucky, threatened for a short while, by fear that the fact that they were not 100% forthcoming with every single little thing they did meant they could possibly be un-American and a spy for communist Russia. I'm not even kidding, folks. If you have not studied history before in that particular era of America, go look it up. That was a really crazy time for a lot of people. And honestly, as a later, applied reason for, why we never wrote stories showing the Justice Society in the 50s, even after the fact, it worked. It explained a lot of things. It was an explanation inspired by real life history so that people could believe it. Ultimately, though, good things happened. We came into the Silver Age, and in September 1961, we had the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story, in which the Silver Age Flash meets his Golden Age counterpart, who, along with the original Justice Society, is said to inhabit an alternate universe. This is the first establishment of the Earth 1 and Earth 2 concept. The Justice Society being on Earth 2, the Justice League, which is your Silver Age characters, on Earth 1. This created an immediate renewed interest in these classic veteran heroes, spawning sequel stories in Flash's solo book, leading to stories in various Justice League issues wherein they would have the two teams hook up together, form one big united army of superhero awesomeness to take on various villains from both worlds. These would be known as the original Crisis stories, in that 90% of the titles were Crisis on Earth 1 and 2, Crisis on here, Crisis of this. They, as I said, up until the last couple ones, they all had the phrase crisis in the story as a way to let readers know from the get-go, hey, it's time for the annual JLA JSA meetup story. Which means you had the JSA appearing on a somewhat predictable schedule, but they didn't have their own book. And they still didn't have a book titled Justice Society. When does that happen? Well, let's tune in and find out, folks. Ultimately, the Earth 1 and 2 crossover storylines did lead to the establishment that the Justice Society, even though they still resided on another Earth, were older veteran heroes. A concept that would inspire the later post-crisis arrangement of the timeline, which we'll touch on in just a second. And it was established for the first time that even though the Justice Society members were older, that they were still in their physical prime due to exposure to the magical energies of one of their villains, a gentleman by the name of, hold on again, let me make sure I have got this straight. Yes, Ian Karkal. This would, of course, be something that would define the Justice Society characters for the next couple decades. But as I said, we eventually ran into a little thing called the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, the Crisis on Infinite Earths had two major impacts to the JSA. One, by having the various alternate Earths merged into one new Earth, the Justice Society officially became the original generation of superheroes, cementing the fact that they had still been heroes in World War II. This also means that characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were now retroactively erased from the Justice Society history, and three new characters were created to fill the gaps in those storylines. Which means that, yes, post-Crisis we basically had copycat heroes to cover for the fact that in the New World there had only ever been one Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, and they belonged to the Justice League generation of heroes. Not a huge loss, since, as I said, they were mostly considered honorary members of the society, but it would impact a few storylines, including some set in modern day, with the Infinity Inc. kids. The other major impact to the society is that this ended the team-up stories, because there was no alternate Earths to bounce back and forth to. Justice Society were simply the veteran heroes who had mostly retired and would just show up for part-time duties to help out the Justice League or mentor individual heroes. Eventually, though, we did get a return to regular publishing with a revival of All-Star Comics. In that, not only was a book called All-Star Comics published once again, but they picked up the original numbering, the first issue of the 76 era being All-Star Comics number 58. This introduced the second major generation of the Justice Society, such as Power Girl, as well as former Seven Soldiers of Victory member Star Spangled Kid and his adult sidekick Stripesy, who would factor into later Justice Society stories through their legacies. This All-Star Comics run would, as we said, focus on them being older but still physically capable superheroing due to their aging process having been stunted. So they were physically much younger than they should have been. Ultimately, good things happened, and we finally got some major Justice Society stories. First was, for a few years, the Justice Society were actually completely removed from existence. In a story called The Last Days of the Justice Society, we saw them heroically sacrifice themselves by entering a pocket dimension in which the event known in Norse mythology as Ragnarok, aka the Twilight of the Gods, was occurring in a perpetual time loop. Justice Society trying to help put an end to this and make sure that these events didn't spill out into the rest of the universe, meant that they were stuck in a pocket dimension where they would have to continually fight the same battle over and over again for eternity. Even if they died, they would simply, like everybody else in the battlefield that died, eventually resurrect when the time loop came back around in the beginning. As I said, this lasted for several years before a mini-series that was done as a follow-up to the Armageddon 2021 event. I think that was it. Armageddon 20. Excuse me, Armageddon 2001, not 2021, 2001. But there was a sequel called Armageddon Inferno, in which other heroes go into the pocket dimension, sometimes called Limbo, to retrieve the Justice Society members, swapping them out with drone pawn soldiers used by the villain du jour, which means that, as far as the pocket dimension was concerned, the right number of people were still in there for its whole little magical time loop thing to exist, and thus the Justice Society were able to leave. This leads into the first actual Justice Society of America series. That's right, in 1991, we finally got a Justice Society of America book. 50 years after the team debuted, they finally got a self-titled book. Again, in the Golden Age, self-titled books weren't a huge thing, but in the modern age, that's how things go. So, hey, congrats. Took you 50 years to get a book with your own team name on the cover, but we love you for it. Unfortunately, the 1991 series did not last, even though it was initially billed as an ongoing. Publication ended with issue 10. The writer, Len Strazewski, explained the cancellation of the series, stating that it was a decision made personally by editor Mike Carlin because he didn't like the artwork or the writing and believed that senior citizen superheroes was not what DC should be publishing. He made his opinion clear to me several times after the cancellation. Mike Carlin himself has never actually disputed this story, although I don't know how many times it's been brought up to him directly, so as of right now, we are going with that is the truth of the matter. That it was canceled because a particular editor gained enough power to dictate the book's ongoing nature and decided, I don't personally like it and agree with the idea of older veteran superheroes saving the day, so, screw it. Now, it should be noted, despite only being 10 issues, Justice Society of America did manage to introduce the character of Jessie Quick, who was the daughter of Golden Age heroes Liberty Bell and Johnny Quick, and who would herself go on to be a major figure in Flash, Teen Titans, and later Justice Society comics. No, seriously, Jessie Quick is actually a really interesting character who came into her own over the years, serving as a member of various superhero teams and showing what multi-generational dynasty heroes are all about. Unfortunately, almost immediately upon the series being canceled, the 1994 crossover series 0 Hour Crisis in Time occurred, this being a spiritual sequel to the Crisis on Infinite Earths. And during the battle between the Justice Society and the time manipulation-powered villain Extant, formerly the villain Monarch, who was the big bad from that Armageddon 2001 comic, whose sequel brought the Justice Society back. So you see how things all kind of go full circle and get tangled together. Anyway, the former Monarch, now called Extant, removes the chronal energies keeping the Justice Society young. The Golden Age Atom, Dr. Midnight, and Hourman die immediately. Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who were separated from the rest of the Justice Society after being pulled into the time stream, merge into a new Hawk God being, resulting in the deaths of their individual identities. Again, the Hawkman thing gets really complicated and convoluted in the 90s, and that's a whole can of beans that we're going to have to open another time. Dr. Fate himself dies of the resulting aging shortly after 0 Hour. Green Lantern is kept young because of the mystical effects of the Star Heart that gives him his power, but loses his ring, having absorbed enough of the energy over the years to continue to be able to use those powers, changing his name to Sentinel, since he has no ring or and thus does not charge it off a lantern, he didn't really see himself fitting the name Green Lantern anymore. It happens, folks. Starman, being alive but too physically old to continue fighting crime, retires and passes on the Starman legacy to his two sons, resulting in the creation of one of the new series following 0 Hour, James Robinson's Starman, which is an extremely good series, and I highly recommend it to many people. Once again, we had a good 5-year gap where the JSA really wasn't a thing, except for the couple veteran heroes. Alan Scott would occasionally mentor young Green Lantern Corps member Kyle Rainier, as well as help out his daughter Jade and his son Obsidian. But 1999 is when we get to the most awesome of the awesome. Justice Society was revived as a monthly series called JSA in 1999, which makes the few remaining original members with younger counterparts. This incarnation of the team focused on the theme of generational legacy and of carrying on the heroic example established by their predecessors. The series was launched by the aforementioned James Robinson, who had Starman join the team early on, before the character eventually retired and passed on his legacy to similarly named character Stargirl, Courtney Whitmore, who was already carrying on the legacy of the original Star-Spangled Kid, being the stepdaughter of the original Kid's adult sidekick Stripesy, who himself would, in his older age, build a mechanical exosuit to serve as his daughter's new sidekick, taking on the name Stripe. This is all good things. Ultimately, though, the big thing I liked about the book is that even though it was said that the surviving original Justice Society members were still the oldest living superheroes around, they were shown to have eventually gained enough physical prowess to be able to hang with their younger counterparts so that they could be mentors both on and off the field. Now, this series would spawn off a couple spin-offs, JSA Classified, which told stories of the team at various points in existence, as well as spotlighting specific members in solo stories. And eventually we got a relaunch of the Justice Society of America book. It later on creating another spin-off, which was a fellow ongoing called JSA All-Stars, because basically they'd created so many legacy heroes, they now had enough to fill out 2 teams. Although, in classic Justice Society fashion, where it is all about respect for history and things that have gone on before, it is said that the JSA All-Stars and the classic JSA team did not split because of internal drama and war with each other, but simply because there was enough of them that they could operate 2 active squads in 2 different physical locations to help spread out their superhero efforts. One of the great highlights of this was the aforementioned Jesse Quick, who had, over the course of the modern Justice Society of America series, met and married the 3rd Hour Man, well, actually the 2nd, who retired, but then after the 3rd died, came back in active duty. We're definitely going to do an Hour Man rambling later and discuss that. But the idea is that she met, fell in love with, and married fellow 2nd generation hero, Hour Man. And the 2 of them, when it came time for the All-Star Squad to be created, decided to have one person go on each squad, making a bit of meta-commentary joke about how both in real life and in comic books, the way the media loves to obsess over the things famous couples do, told the press, no, stop the rumor mongering. We're not having problems with our marriage. We're not getting a divorce. We're just doing what most non-famous couples do. Work in different offices. It's not that big a deal. And honestly, I gotta say, their marriage did a lot to improve both characters, making them more interesting as the little bit of personality foibles and anxieties they had in their younger years about carrying on the legacies of their parents disappeared due to the emotional support they gave each other, as that's what a great marriage and relationship should be about. Supporting each other and boosting each other up emotionally so you can be better people as individuals. Now, things do kind of get crazy later on, because eventually we did get a event DC calls Flashpoint, where, similar to Crisis on Infinite Earths, they basically restarted everything from square one again, but it was not really as well done. And originally there was not a Justice Society of America. Many of these characters were said not to exist. Eventually they published stories about a post-Flashpoint Earth 2 where the characters existed, but most of the Golden Age ones had been killed off. And then there was Convergence and Rebirth, and which resulted in a continuity which was like 90% pre-Flashpoint. So we kind of got the Justice Society back. But it's just, you know what? I have a standing policy that, for reference, folks, I don't deal with DC after Flashpoint. Like, we're not going to get into that rant here, but for reference, in my ramblings, I'm just generally not going to discuss what happened post-Flashpoint in DC, because I quit reading the books then, and every time I read little summaries of what they've done with the characters, I'm generally unhappy. I'm not inspired to start reading it again. I know they did Convergence and they did Rebirth to try to restore a lot of the stuff that people were upset that they tried to erase out of continuity, but to me it's still not the books we were reading in the late 90s and the early 2000s. That right there, I mean, that period of time was a great time for DC. And the modern day Justice Society of America book was one of those highlights. Real quick before we kind of finish this off, because as I said, that is your big, quick and dirty primer into the history of the Justice Society, at least on a publishing front, because we're going to do more detailed ramblings in the future on individual members, major story arcs, down the line. But the nitty-gritty is you can start with just Volume 2 of the Justice Society of America, which is the 1999 series. You don't really have to read anything previous, just understand the basic concept that some of these heroes are the veteran heroes from the 40s that were the first generation of superheroes. And through various little things here and there, some of them are still physically fit enough to guide the next generation of heroes, even in combat. But as I said before, the late 90s series cemented what the earlier series had always kind of implied, which is that they were the first generation, and in many ways they were the greatest generation. The Justice Society has always been about doing what is right, doing what is American, and doing the job because you believe in being a hero. It's not about the fame. It's not about the fortune. It's not about feeling like a god amongst men. It's about being a society, a family. You know, that's why the team's called the Justice Society. We're working together to build something bigger than ourselves. We're creating a culture, basically, you know, because that's one of the things about a society. Every society, every civilization has a culture that goes along with it. Philosophy, and goals, and camaraderie, and that's what the JSA has always built, and that's one of the things I love about the comics and why I keep rereading them, and why I recommend you read them. Now, if you do want to go deeper, by all means, you can get various reprints of the 2 different runs of All-Star Comics, the team-ups with the JLAs. There are actually trade paperbacks that specifically collect the various team-up crisis stories. It's like, I think it's like 2, maybe 3 volumes. It's definitely at least 2 volumes. I can't remember if they got them all done without needing a third, but there's at least 2. So you should go research that too, because you get your Justice League goodness in there as well. The brief 91 series, things like Armageddon Inferno, The Last Days of the Justice Society, which kind of showed you how they attempted to temporarily retire these heroes, but you can't keep the greatest generation down. And that's what they are. That's what they will always be. Because no matter what DC Comics does to its continuity, in the hearts of the fans, the Justice Society will live on forever. And here at the Ramblings, we have only begun to discuss the awesomeness of it. So, tune in for 7 days. If you're not a big comic book fan, don't worry. I'm going to give you a break for a few weeks before we get more into the history of the society and its various legacy members. It's okay. But we will, every 7 days, bring you an awesome discussion, breakdown, history, review, whatevs, about something that is entertainment. And it's always going to be positive because, well, I will throw in a little constructive criticism here and there. I do not dwell on the negativity. If you want to dwell on the negativity, it's out there. It's the internet. Me, I like to show respect to my creators. People that entertain us and give us their best, because imagination is awesome. The greatest superpower is being able to tell the stories that inspire real-life heroes. Bye-bye, folks.